In the last movie, we saw how to put together and send a basic email with PHP. In this movie, I want to explore the concept of headers in the HTML email a little further. Now, if you remember in the last movie, when we received our email, we were able to look at the raw source for the email and see all of this information at the top. That is the headers. And you'll see that they have a very standard look to them. Every one has the name of the header followed by a colon and a space, and then whatever the header's value is. And there's a variety of them here. And then each header also is separated by a line return. A new line tells us, okay, now we have a new header. And at the end, when we're finally done, we have two line returns. We have one after here, and then we have a second blank line that's here. And if we notice in the original email, that blank line disappears. That blank line exists to let the mail program know, hey, we've stopped with the headers, and now we're ready to display the actual message. So that's an important thing, is to have that double line there. Now, the other thing I want to point out about the headers is this X dash. That's a standard convention for any time you have a non-standard header, and it allows us to put almost anything we want after the X. So we can send whatever information along with the email that we'd like, such as what PHP version we're using, for example, and we'll do that in a minute. Now, while we don't strictly have to send any additional headers, it's useful to understand what they are because there are times when it'll come into play. Let's switch back to our sandbox page. We'd already started composing our headers here. We have the from address. One improvement that I think we should make, if we can, is to name who it's from. Having a named from address is going to help you get past spam filters. So you may run into problems, like I mentioned before, using this format on some Windows machines, but try it. If you have problems, you can always go back, but it will help you to navigate some of those spam filters. Now, if we want to add additional headers here, remember what we need. At the end of each one, we need a new line. So I'm going to use the /n, and as long as I'm inside double quotes, that's important, then this will be a special character /n to say new line. Now you may find through experimentation that you actually need /r/n. It's been reported in the PHP community that under certain circumstances you need one or the other. It might depend on whether you're on Windows or Linux, or whether you're using your own server to send the email, or whether you're using Google or someone like that. So if you run into problems, that's another thing you can try, is the line endings. But I'm going to just use /n. That should work for me. Now I'm ready to build up that header string and provide additional arguments. So I'm going to do that here with the reply to header. So reply dash capital 2 all together, colon space, and then who should this email go back to? Now we don't have to specify it. Otherwise, if someone hits reply to the message, it'll go back to the from address. But if we had an alternate address that we wanted the email to be returned to, so it was not the same as the from address, then we could use reply to make that happen. And again, I've got the /n at the end. The next two headers that we'll look at are the carbon copy and blind carbon copy headers, CC colon space and BCC colon space, and then whoever we want to copy on that. We probably don't want to copy the same person the message is to, but that's what I've put in there just as a placeholder. So this would be some other email address. Next, let's go ahead and specify our own special custom non-standard header. These are standard headers. A non-standard one would be something like X-mailer. And that would say, hey, who's mailing this? So we'll append that to tell it, hey, it's being mailed from PHP. PHP, and then what version of PHP we're running. So that'll be appended to all emails now that are sent out by our server. And the last two headers that I want you to see are MIME version and content type. Now, MIME version, we've seen the MIME before. Multipurpose Internet Mail Extension is what it stands for. And we saw it back when we were talking about MIME types, back when we were creating forms for our file uploading. MIME version is almost always going to be 1.0, but it is something that we can specify, and it's a good idea to specify it if we're going to be doing strange things with our content type. Now, the content type is going to be assumed to be text plain. That's going to be what our email is. It's just plain text email. Well, that's where this gets interesting, because if we say HTML, now we can send HTML in our message. So our message can be an HTML page, and we'll be able to send HTML email just like that, just by changing the content type so that when it's received, the mail program says, oh, I'm looking through the headers, and I notice this is supposed to be an HTML email. I'll render it as HTML instead of as plain text. So that's the kind of thing you can do. There are more content types. You can do things for mixed type so that you can send both text and HTML together. You can also have attachments by changing the content type. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and leave it as plain. Let's try this out. I'm going to go ahead and take the CC and BCC out because we don't need those. We're not going to send it to multiple times. I'll leave reply to in even though it doesn't actually matter. Actually, I need to add one thing here, if you'll notice. I need to put in my line ending. One more. I'm glad I caught that. So make sure that you have another line ending there to let it know, hey, the headers are going to keep continuing. Let's save it. Let's go back to our Firefox page and let's just reload Send Mail. There it is. It's sent. We'll go back to the mail program. Let's do Get Mail. There it is. We got a new one. See, my name now popped up instead of the email address. So that's a nice thing. You see the different timestamp on it. We'll open it up. Everything here looks exactly the same. I have an extra line ending. We'll talk about that in 1 second. And here's my headers. So here's all the regular ones. A lot of these are attached while it's in progress towards me. Different servers along the way add some information to the headers. And then they really start here with who's it to, the subject, from, reply to, you'll see is in there now, and then Xmailer, the custom one we added, and then content type and MIME version as well. Now, as I mentioned before, there's an extra space there because we have an extra return. So we returned one too many times, and that gave us an extra space at the top of our message. It's because when PHP puts the headers together, it knows that it needs to end that last one with a carriage return. So we don't have to specify that new line ending. It takes care of it for us. So in the headers, the last one never gets that /in. And then it'll put it together, it'll send it in as headers, it'll add those extra line returns for you and send it off. So that's all there is to headers. I think there's just some useful options in there, and some of the additional features like HTML email, attachments, and things like that are available to you if you understand headers. But all of this still relies on the very primitive PHP mail, which often uses SendMail, which many of you may have found out didn't work for you. So we want to move now to a more robust option, and that is SMTP. We'll begin looking at that in the next movie.